Hi there, and welcome to a very sad edition of the Gersnet Weekly Podcast. I'm sure you are all aware the news today about Walter Smith passing away at the age of 73. We were going to do a preview show tonight. We were going to preview the game tomorrow against Aberdeen, but obviously there are bigger things to discuss now. So I'm joined by Stewart Weir to sort of just go through, Walter's career and everything he'd done for Rangers. And I mean, I don't know how you feel, Stuart. I mean, it's been a really flat day. I mean, obviously your initial thoughts are with his wife and kids and grandkids and family and close friends and stuff like that. And I'm not really one that sort of goes with or gets this thing when people are upset when celebrities die and stuff like that. But I have to be honest, I've felt it today. There's been one or two in my lifetime. When Bowie went, I felt that. When Davy Cooper went, I really felt that. And today, it really has. I mean, I've really struggled at work. I felt really flat all day. It really is. It's quite a historically sad day for the club and the supporters and everyone connected to Rangers.
Yeah, I agree with you, Colin. When I first heard this morning, it was my sister that actually contacted me to tell me, and it was one of those moments that there's not a lot you can say. It was something I knew. You knew it was inevitable, and simply because of what we'd heard over the last week or so, but it's still really, really sad. And everything that Walter did, and I put it up and posted something on Twitter earlier on about him being a great manager, but an even better man. And I think anybody that ever came into contact with Walter through their life would appreciate that, because he was a guy who was so knowledgeable in what he did, had so many contacts, had so many people on high within the game of football who would listen to what he had to say, and acknowledge what he had to say, because he was such a clever tactician or a clever coach, and a clever man manager as well. And you start putting all these things together, and especially putting it into a Rangers context, and the period of time that he did that over, you suddenly realised just how significant he was in terms of Rangers, but also how significant he is in terms of people's perception today, and the genuine sadness there is in football, because he did touch so many people at so many different levels and at so many different clubs, and and with the national team as well.
Yeah, I mean, I found it. I mean, some of the tributes today have been, really heartwarming. You've had folk like Pep Guardiola making comments. Found it really telling that Graham Souness didn't appear publicly today. He made a statement. I think that gave you an indication as to how upset he was. I liked the words of Douglas Park this morning, saying about Walter Smith. He embodied everything that a Ranger should be, and I think that's very apt. I mean, McCoyce was on TalkSport this morning, sounded really emotional. Steven Gerrard, I think we've all seen the video of him. He struggled as well. It really is. It's a kind of thing that, I think this could impact the club for a number of weeks. I think the place could be flat for a few weeks. It's, everyone I've spoken to today, whether it be text and stuff like that, you just get that sense of just the end of an era. I mean, but I was looking at I was doing a wee bit before we came on. I was looking at how many trophies I've seen Rangers won. Now, give or take a few, considering I'm not great at maths, right? But I came to a total of 43. Walter Smith was directly responsible for 21 of those, and he was assistant for another 7, I believe. So, you're talking about essentially, I'm a 48-year-old guy, and Walter Smith is responsible for like 70% of the trophies that I've seen the club win.
I mean, that side of it, when you look at his track record as a Rangers manager and the trophies that he's won, it's absolutely incredible. And the level of success that he had, and not just the level of success that he had as a club manager and domestically, also what he so very nearly achieved in a European context as well. I still think that 92-93 season, even though I lived through it and worked through it, I still think actually today I'm more in term, I'm more likely to appreciate what that achievement was that season. 44 games unbeaten, domestic treble, unbeaten in Europe. I noticed it's difficult to get people to pull all their thoughts together. I noticed the BBC did a thing saying the games that shaped Walter Smith's career, and they missed out either of the two matches against Leeds United, and that, for somebody who worked within the media then, and somebody who knew a great many people south of the border, that was a great period in terms of Walter Smith's tenure at Ibrox, but it also put a marker down as to where Rangers actually were in terms of the context of British football, and the fact that they beat the English champions, and the fact that Walter Smith also outthought and outgunned Howard Wilkinson, who was the Leeds manager, who was one of these guys who was thought as some sort of doyen of coaching and management in England at the time. And Walter basically outsmarted him not once but twice. And I would have had that pretty high in any list of important matches for Walter Smith. I mean, today when my daughter phoned me, and I started talking to her for a wee while, and again, it sort of comes back to you then that just actually how much contact you had with Walter Smith. It's almost like during the 90s, you didn't actually appreciate what was happening at Ibrox until you've seen what's happened in the last, 7 or 8 years, and then you fully appreciate how lucky you were to actually be living at that time or working in and around Rangers at that time, because you just get carried away in a kind of on a wave that everything they did was going to be successful. And if you happen to be the Rangers man on a newspaper, or you happen to be a chief football writer or whatever it was on a newspaper at that time, wherever Rangers went, you went with them. So it goes without saying that you had quite a few adventures, and the adventures ultimately would come back to have even closer contact with the likes of Walter, because he was he was a guy who conducted the press conferences and would speak to you. And he had this, for people that looked at Walter, they would have seen an exterior that looked as if there was quite a hard shell, but it wasn't. There was a hard shell, and it could be quite tough at times, quite hard at times. If he had something to say, but the thing was, if he had something to say to you, he said it, and that was it. If you were in a position where you cheesed off Walter Smith for a period of time, you really had to have overstepped the mark. I mean, I did one or two things and was immediately pulled up for it and chastised. But you knew when Walter was telling you this, it was maybe one for your own good, so you didn't do it again, but also that this was a shot across your bows. I remember Rangers played in a European tie, and Richard Gough didn't. Richard Gough hadn't played, and I did a piece. I just phoned Richard up at the house, and he spoke to me, and I did a piece with Richard. And the next morning, I phoned Ibrox and Walter said, "Oh, hi, how you doing? Is this you want to ask for permission to speak to Richard Gough?" And I said, I said, "No, I got him last night." He went, "I know you got him last night. It was nice to read it in the Evening Times this morning." So that was him chastising you and giving you a ticking off, but it was also him basically doing it in such a way that he didn't want to make you feel too bad, but you knew that he had taken exception to something you'd done. And in all my dealings with Walter, I think, I tweeted earlier on that it was probably the fairest guy I ever met in football, and I stick to that. If he had something to say or he was unhappy, he would say it, and that was it. That was the end of it. There was no long grudges. There was no, not returning calls. There was nothing like that. And I think that actually made him even more popular with people, because you knew exactly where you stood with him.
Yeah, I think that's something that's came out today. It's not just his achievements in football and the Rangers in particular, which are substantial. I don't think anyone could deny that. But a lot of the stuff today is kind of similar to what you just sort of gave us there, Stuart. The personal anecdotes, the people saying what a man he was. I mean, I found it interesting watching Steven Gerrard genuinely struggle today. He really looked quite cut up. I mean, Steven Gerrard's been up here, 3 years, 4 years? It's not. I mean, he's obviously known him over that period, but he's not been involved with Walter Smith day on day at the club, blah blah blah. But yeah, he's still got to know him really well. He obviously holds him high, and in his affections, and I think that tells you everything you need to know about the man. Not just the manager and what he done in his professional life, but so much stuff today about what you were saying. The actual the man. Everyone's saying he was a great husband, a great dad, great granddad, and somebody said today on one of the news channels, and I thought that was quite apt. He was like everybody's Rangers dad. You know what I mean? And when I think of him in that sort of first time at Rangers, he always had the cardigan on, and that's what he looked like. I mean, he looked like your dad. You know what I mean? And
I'm glad I'm speaking to you sort of 10 hours or whatever it is after I learned the news, because if I'd been asked at the time, I'd have been quite upset and emotional. When my daughter phoned me and she sort of reminisced about some of the things with the likes of Walter or me going away with Rangers and her coming to the airport to when I come back and the likes, and that sort of got me a wee bit. And whilst I'm really saddened, and I'm really saddened for his wife, and I'm really saddened as well for the boys, Neil and Stevie, and I feel it for them, especially. And there was a bit when Rangers went to Choco in Italy pre-season training 1 year. Believe it or not, I was the only journalist that actually went. So I would film my stuff first thing in the morning, having spoken to Walter literally the last thing at night. And then they would go up to the training ground, I'd film my stuff, and then that was me for 2 hours. So I'd just go down to the swimming pool. And down at the swimming pool, 1 year you had Michael Gough, Richard's son, David Murray's two sons, and Neil and Stevie. And I was on suntan lotion duty with the boys to make sure they didn't become, too lobster red in this warm Tuscan sun. And it was, there was some points I thought to myself, actually, I'm just going to give these boys a swig of this stuff, because I can't be bothered putting this on them all the time to make sure that. And then at the back of my mind, it was always like, if Walter or Goffey comes back down the hill here and their kids are too red, I'm for it. So needless to say, I didn't want to follow up with Walter. So the kids were on factor 150, never mind factor 50. But I remember in that trip, we were a bit of a laugh and a joke. And Walter grabbed a hold of Stephen, and I mean, I gave him a hug as your dad does, and at that point, I did genuinely realise that was Walter Smith was a dad that loved his kids. No, he wasn't just the Rangers manager that I had to phone up and ask about groin injuries. And that when that moment came back to me today, I did find myself getting, I wouldn't say tearing up, but I did get myself, find myself getting emotional. And during the course of the day, you piece wee bits together of what Walter did, what he meant to me in a kind of working capacity, and also what he meant to the Rangers fans who I mean truly loved the guy. And if they hadn't loved him enough the first time, they truly loved him the second time. But just to give you an example, I dug this out, right? I don't know if you can see it, right? Right. That's Walters. Because we were at Titwood when Rangers were training at Titwood, Clydesdale Cricket Club's ground. And Rangers were training down there. And it was a really freezing cold, wet, miserable morning. And I'd gone down there to speak to somebody, and I didn't have a hood in my jacket, and I was getting wet, and it was and Walter said, you look cold. I said, for the first time in my life, I feel cold. And he took his bonnet off and threw it to me and said, here. He was out training. It was soaking wet anyway. And I don't know what kind of good it would have done me, but it was more the gesture that he, that counted. To hear when somebody would give you his hat off his head when it was still warm, just because you looked cold. And for me, that's a kind of measure of what Walter Smith was as a guy who had a job to do, but never really, never saw you as being too much trouble to help you out. And last year, the Sunday Post were putting a book together about Jim McLean, and they phoned me up and asked me if I would do a piece with Walter. And I eventually got him through the boys, and I didn't really want to trouble him too much. But through the boys, I said, is it going to be okay to give him a call? Aye, fine. And then when Walter came on, he went, how long is this going to take? I said, 20 minutes, half an hour. I said, any blanks? I said, I'll fill them in if you trust me. He went, aye, that's okay. So the 20-minute phone call, and I looked at the phone, and because I wanted to be writing things down and using my keyboard and the likes, and we were approaching nearly 2 hours. So once I got him talking about football and different things, he really wanted to talk about it. And the thing was, because it was about Jim McLean, he had so many Jim McLean stories, and I tried desperately just to get him to, let me write one of the stories that I knew about, or he had told me about, and just to give a different perspective on Jim McLean. But Walter wouldn't do that. He would have a laugh at maybe Jim's expense, but he wasn't going to share that with anybody, if you know what I mean. He wasn't going to have the guy ridiculed or laughed at publicly. That was maybe a private story or a private joke, and a great many people knew them, because Walter would regale you with these stories at press conferences when you were finished after like 10 minutes with nothing to say, and he would have just sit there and go around the houses about different things. And I really, really want, and it came into my head a couple of weeks ago, I should maybe try and pursue that and see if there's maybe some more to be done, if Walter would be willing to actually, go on the record this time. Sadly, it's not to be, and maybe those stories are best kept, under wraps or for other occasions. But he genuinely, when he told these stories, he was really, really funny at telling them, and that was something. He had a really dry sense of humour. And a couple of years back, one of the guys on Facebook contacted me there to say the last time we'd seen Walter was at Alan Davidson's funeral, when Walter did one of the eulogies, and it was really, really funny. And I know that if you know, in moments of sadness, sometimes you cling on to anything if it's going to take you away from the sniffs and the tears and all the rest of it. But genuinely, Walter was really funny and really genuine with his tribute to Alan Davidson. And I think a lot of people who thought they knew Walter Smith up until that point, or had been in contact with Walter Smith, suddenly realised that there was a different Walter Smith there, that all the people who dealt with him on a sort of daily or, you know, weekly basis had seen over the years. And I think a lot of folk thought that we were just havering when we said that Walter's a really, really funny guy, because he always looked quite serious.
Quite dour looking.
He did look quite dour, but I can only say, you know, that for me, it was always really, really helpful. I'll give you another example. The Evening Times were dishing out $5,000 and $10,000 bingo prizes, and all of a sudden nobody won it for several weeks. And I think it was something like £136,000, which back in 1993 was a small fortune even then. Yeah. So when I was going out of the office, George McKechnie, who was the editor, basically said, when you're down at Turnberry, ask Walter Smith if he'll present the cheque. Now, this is a couple of days before, I think it was either a cup semi-final or a cup final. And I'm like, aye, I'll go and ask him. But, you know, I thought it better to ask Walter and basically, you know, get both barrels from Walter than it would have been for Joss to ask Walter further down the line why he didn't present the cheque. And then it would have been so much both barrels, but fired out a howitzer. So I said, when the press conference and that had finished, and everybody spoken to the players and the likes, I said, Walter, kind of 2 minutes. He went, no, the Evening Times were in with everybody else today. I'm not doing it. I said, no. I said, it's something different. I said, right. I said, we've had a bingo prize winner. They've won £136,000. Would you present the cheque? So Walter said, when? I said, maybe today. And I won't tell you what he says, right? But it ended in off. In fact, it ended in several offs, interspersed with, we're preparing for a cup final. I've got better things to do. How much have they won? So I told him. He went, oh. He went, how would they get here anyway? I went, we fly them down in a helicopter. He went, what? I said, we fly them in a helicopter. I said, this is big news story for the Evening Times. Spending another £5,000 for the day on a helicopter isn't going to make any difference when you're dishing out £136,000. I said, they'll be here in 20 minutes. I mean, no, I said, I can't fit it in. I said, you know, you could do it any time. And he sort of thought, and what about after dinner tonight? I said, right, what time are you having dinner? It's between 5 and 6. I said, are you sure? It's just a picture we're having. I said, aye. I said, there'll be a couple of words from you congratulating him. I said, I'll do the words. You don't need to worry about that. I said, so there'll not be any reporter here. It'll just be the photographer. Right, okay. 6 o'clock. None of you are 15 minutes late. If they're not here at 6 o'clock, I'm not doing it at all. Right, okay. So right on the phone, I had the one mobile phone that belonged to the sports desk at the Evening Times with me. So I phoned up Carol, George McKechnie's secretary. She put me through to George. I said, right, it's a go. Are you sure? I said, aye. What time do you need to be there for? 5:30. I wasn't taking any chances. So, right, okay, 5:30. I said, if you're not there at 5:30, he's not doing it. Because I thought, you know, the woman who'd won the bingo prize is unlikely to walk away and say, I'm not doing this picture anymore because Walter's not here. So anyway, they came time to they flew me down in the helicopter, and I'd done, the words were all done up. So people just to go with a photographer did the photographs. Anyway, they come back and the next morning, early start. Do you want to check some of these pictures, some of these photographs? I went, aye. So looking through, they printed up some of a series of photographs. There's Walter with the prize winner in the check. Walter with the prize winner and her husband in the check. Walter and Archie and the prize winners with the check. Walter and Archie and Goffey and McCoist and Durant with the prize winners with the check. Walter, Archie, the squad with the prize winners with the check. Next picture, here's Walter and McCoist with the headsets on in the helicopter, giving it this. So in the space of a conversation with Walter, I'd gone from having to coax and cajole him into doing it and him eventually saying yes, to these people suddenly arriving and suddenly turning into a holiday camp. And that's what he was like as a guy. If he bought into something, he would do it and he would go for it. And you know, it was I could never have said thank you enough to him after that. I'm not sure what it would have been like if he'd lost the cup tie. Fortunately, the Rangers won the cup tie, so I was still in the good books then. But he would have gone out his way to help you and to make things happen. And on social media today, you can tell that the amount of photographs that have been posted up in different contexts and all the rest of it. And even when they went to Everton, I was the only Scottish journalist who went down to Everton to see him installed as a manager. And Archie Knox and I had a bit of a love-hate relationship at times. And Walter once asked me why I kept up saying Archie. and I'm like, what? I said, he's done this and he's done that. And then I was a wee sort of tee-heeing down the phone. This was basically Walter, just, you know, his sense of humour shining through. Yeah. But when I went down to Everton, I think it was the guy Philip Johnson was the chairman of Everton. There was him and Walter and Archie at the top table. They had the press conference, and I could see Archie sort of looking around the room, and he spotted me through all these bodies, and he went, and he waved, and I waved back, and then he nudged Walter, and he went, and then Walter came in, and Walter waved, and all of a sudden all these other journalists are all sort of turning around as if to say, who are they waving at? And then it was at the end of the press conference, Archie had said, come on down here, and introduced me to the Everton chairman as their very good Scottish journalist friend, Stewart Weir. I ended up going for lunch in the boardroom. I think because they didn't have any other pals there at the time. But it was a measure of him, you know, acknowledging the fact that you had a job to do and effectively making it as easy as possible for you to do that job.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you talk about Jim McLean there, because I mean, everybody knows that, like, you know, Walter arrived in '86 as Graham Souness's assistant, but he had the chance to go like 3 years previous when Jim McLean turned down the job. Now, initially, the story I read, I think it was in Walter Smith's book, was that Jim had said to him, "We're moving. You know, I'm taking the Rangers job. Get your gear together, and we're heading down." And I remember reading the story of Walter Smith painting this picture. He was in the dressing room at Tannadice packing all his stuff up when he got word that McLean had sort of changed his mind and knocked the job back. And I remember just the sense of sort of frustration that Smith was talking about, because I suppose he maybe saw that as his only chance. You know what I mean? You would be quite right in thinking, you know, clubs like Rangers don't come twice. They don't come knocking at your door twice. You maybe get one opportunity, and if you knock it back, then that could be you. And I think that's sort of testament. I mean, I think we need to remember, I mean, he was a great guy for Rangers, a great manager, trophies and all the rest of it. But first and foremost, you know, he was a Rangers supporter.
Oh yeah,
you know, he grew up a Rangers supporter. He was there. He was at Ibrox the day of the disaster and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I mean. See, reading that story in his book, you know, you genuinely got a sense of how gutted he was, because he thought, well, that's me. My chance has just basically passed me by.
But see, there's a couple of times actually, I think that professional as he was, there was a couple of times where, I'm not saying he let his guard down, but he almost had to stop himself and rally himself and say, right, I'm the Rangers manager now. if you remember the League Cup final in '87, Rangers beat Aberdeen in penalties. They were a goal down. Coops hit this unstoppable free kick, and then Rangers scored a brilliantly worked goal when Jimmy Nicholl headed the ball forward. We Fleck laid it off to Durant. Durant played it to McCoist. McCoist then played in Durant and put it in. It was a beautifully worked goal. And Walter celebrated that goal like a punter. If you actually look at it, he celebrated that goal as a Rangers fan. And then it was like, professional head back on again.
Yeah.
You go there. No. And this at a time when Souness was obviously up in the stand, and Walter was conducting things, on the touchline. And it was, I always thought there were times where Walter actually celebrated and still did it later on in his career, like a supporter would, because it meant so much to him.
Yeah.
Not just being the manager of Rangers, but actually being a Rangers man.
Yeah, that's the sense I got reading that, and he got his chance. He turned up in '86, and Souness was always sort of. I've been to a few nights in the Lown when Souness has been there, and he always spoke well of Walter Smith. He always said, he felt that he picked the best possible guy, because Souness obviously didn't have a huge amount of knowledge in the Scottish football scene. He played his football outside Scotland basically all his professional life, and so he needed someone who had that sort of street knowledge, and that was Smith. But the next thing I want to talk to you, Stuart, is when Souness left. That was a bit of a shock. I don't think any of us has seen it coming, and I remember, like, for a few days, all the people that were linked with the job. And I'm not going to lie, when Walter was promoted, I remember a lot of supporters feeling slightly deflated and a bit, oh really? You know what I mean? Because and this will possibly happen, when Gerrard moves on, but because you had such a name like Souness, a sort of global name, this guy that's known throughout the footballing world. And I'm not being derogatory here to Walter Smith, obviously, because he's got a similar status now, but back then he didn't. He didn't quite. He was an assistant manager at the time. And it'll maybe be the same when Gerrard goes. The next person that comes in is not going to have that same sort of status. And I do remember me and my mates being kind of, didn't see that coming, And we spoke to supporters. Some of them were disappointed that we hadn't got a bigger name in to replace Souness. But he made the job his own, really. And I always remember, like, I got a ticket on the morning that Rangers were playing Aberdeen, that last game of the season for the title decider. Basically, whoever won that game, I think Aberdeen only needed a draw, actually. Aberdeen, if they got a draw that day, they were going to be champions. We needed to win. I think we had to send out the tea lady and one of the ball boys. There was that many injuries at the time, and Walter had been in sort of post for 3 or 4 games. And as I said, I got a ticket on the morning. I've been sort of scurrying about all week, managed to get a ticket on the morning of the game. And I just did lots of memories for that game, Hateley's goals, all that kind of thing. But the one abiding memory was, and the reception that he got is when Walter came out with the trophy. You know what I mean? And he was only there for the last 4 games, but I've always considered that he was the one that sort of carried us over the line. You know what I mean? I always felt that was his championship, and it was a great way to start off his managerial career. I thought at Ibrox.
I thought, Colin, that his stock was really high within football. Jock Stein thought he was a clever guy in terms of football, which is why I heard McCoy referring to the fact that Walter was his youth team coach with Scotland when he was like 17. Yeah. So he worked under Jim McLean, who thought, obviously thought the world of him, because again, Jim McLean didn't suffer fools, and I think him and Walter were actually were a good balance for each other. I think Walter brought Jim McLean back to reality a few times. It wasn't always easy, but he did. Alex Ferguson thought Walter was a great coach as well. So it was an easy choice for Souness, I think. Once he's gone round the houses and been part, and he's also got a chance to see Walter Smith and what Walter Smith was about at an international level.
Yeah, in Mexico.
So that deal was already already done. The thing that, and I get exactly what you were saying, that, I mean, Rangers were basically connected with every, I can remember Terry Venable's name being one of the names that was being bandied about. And when they held the press conference at Rangers, when Walter looked as if he was going to have to take a suck of a lemon every 5 seconds to take a smile off his face when he was appointed Rangers manager, the most telling thing that press conference came from Richard Gough, when the question, it wasn't couched in those terms that you said you were really disappointed.
Yeah.
It was more, to Richard Gough, are you disappointed that Graham Souness has left as manager? And Richard Gough, who by this time, so that's like 1989? No, sorry, 1991 it would be when Souness left.
Yeah.
Richard Gough had already known Walter Smith for 11 years. And Richard Gough said, actually, from what I could see, Walter's been doing the job for the last 2 years anyway. Now, that was both damning in terms of what everybody maybe thought of Souness,
yeah,
but also enlightening as to maybe this guy's not going to be as bad or as much of a come down as what a lot of people think. And it didn't take Walter very long to suddenly establish himself. When you go out and you sign, start signing the likes of Davy Robertson, and you go out and you start signing the likes of Mikhailichenko, and you start signing the likes of Andy Gorham, it's like, that's a pretty decent signing, and the great signings went on thereafter. So I think, it was one of these ones, maybe it went a wee bit undercover, but I do think that Walter Smith was earmarked for the Rangers job long before Souness decided to go to Liverpool. I think that was almost like a done deal before Souness went in and said, Anfield's calling, I'm going.
Yeah.
And again, it worked in Rangers' favour, because you were dealing with a guy who was already in there with the bricks, but was also a Rangers man who would have quite happily put his name in a few of those bricks as well.
It's hard to go through Walter Smith's Rangers career, and we'll come on to his second period at the club, which I think is arguably the better of the two, considering where the club were financially and all that kind of thing, and obviously he got us to the Europa League. But we'll come on and talk about that. But can't talk about Walter Smith without talking about 92, 93. And I talk to my son about this every now and again. I was just like, son, I can't explain how good it was to be a Rangers supporter in that season. And I was probably the perfect age. I was about 19, 20 at the time. And it just felt like every game, especially in the Champions League, every game was just such a big occasion. We went undefeated for 44 games, including every game in Europe that season, including the two qualifying games. You had the Leeds United game, that great night, against Marseille at Ibrox. The same over in France, that Gersnet goal. So many great memories for that night. And, a lot of people maybe don't realise, younger folk and all the rest of it, Rangers were one goal away from reaching the Champions League final that season. If we scored another goal in Marseille that night and we had a couple of chances and we'd beat them that night, Rangers were in the Champions League final against AC Milan. And like when you were talking about the Leeds United game earlier on, that night at Ibrox, I would still put that as my all-time favourite night at Ibrox, my favourite Rangers game of all time. The noise was just indescribable, and going into every game that season, as I said, especially in Europe, I was at Hampden when we beat Aberdeen to win the League Cup. I was at Celtic Park when we won the treble in that season. It just felt like it was just going to continue and go on and on and on. And it's hard to explain to supporters of a certain age now who have had a very different experience in supporting Rangers, that for 12 months it felt like we were almost like the biggest club in Europe. And I've maybe been a wee bit over the top there, but that's how it felt. You know, we
Yeah.
felt like a proper big club, and it was a joy to be a Rangers supporter for that year.
And you were also at the big table, Colin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like you were there on merit, you know. And as a kind of maybe a side issue, that, you know, I was at the Evening Times then. The Evening Times had like Battle of Britain specials all week leading up to these Leeds games. And then when Rangers were drawn against Marseille, we had a French week. Do you know what I mean? With French fashion and onion soup and all these different things. And so the bounce that Rangers got football-wise and Scottish football got in terms of what Rangers were doing also spread elsewhere. You certainly had newspapers doing all these different things because they could, because it was guaranteed that Rangers were going to be there. Yeah. And the following year, I always remember when Rangers get knocked out by Levski Sofia in the first round tie. Somebody at Evening Times, who will remain nameless, said, it's, you know, so much for your big team, to my then sports editor, Ian Scott. And Scotty came back and went, "But you going to film the rest of the paper with?" And there was a kind of glacial look that came back across, that people didn't actually realise, even if you weren't a Rangers fan, and even if you weren't that interested in football, there were spin-offs around that time. Yeah. And it really was, you know, I was saying to my eldest daughter earlier on today about that. You sometimes wish you could just go back in time and relive that, because when you were in the middle of it, you didn't actually realise how good it was.
Yeah.
And that was a fantastic run with Rangers, and again, you know, there was the you know, through adversity as well, you had Rangers coming through domestically. That was the same, you know, the end of the season. They lost McCoist, who was scoring goals for fun at that point in time. They lost McCoist. They had to rejig how the team would play. So they ended up playing with a front 1.5 almost, with Haitley and Durant playing off him. So tactically, coaching-wise, managerially-wise, it was Walter Smith got the best out of those players, probably through his pragmatism. I mean, you know, different times through the 90s, he kept reinventing. Okay, the Rangers would sign players, but he also reinvented how the team played. So you look back at the 96 Scottish Cup final, Rangers were already playing then with 3 central defenders. You know, you'd I think it was Gough, Bjorkland and Petric, and if the 2 fullbacks were like wing backs, and then you still had like almost like 3 midfield players, Gascoigne being one of them, and then Laudrup ahead of him, and then Jury ahead of him. I mean, so if you put it down, you know, you say to Rangers, Walter Smith was a 4-4-2 exponent. No, really, he actually could play 5-5-2-2-1-1. If you know what I mean, he was tactically very, very clever, and you know, go forward a few years, when Sir Alex Ferguson desperately needed a number 2, who did he phone? Walter. And Walter won an FA Cup winners' medal when United beat Millwall. You know, and a lot of people forget that, but if people there holding Sir Alex Ferguson as the greatest manager of all time, when he was in his moment of need, who did he turn to? Walter Smith.
I read a good story today. I'd read it before, actually, that Darren Fletcher told a story that when Ronaldo first arrived, Walter Smith was there, and you know, he was doing all the fancy flicks and the tricks and all that kind of stuff, and Smith felt he was not being direct enough, not, you know, too much sort of style and not enough substance, if you know what I mean. So
he also felt Colin, that Ronaldo was ripping the piss out his teammates.
Yeah. So he stopped in training games. He stopped fouls. You couldn't be fouled, and that forced Ronaldo. Apparently, Dan Fletcher was saying, you know, for the first 2 or 3 days, Ronaldo was getting frustrated. He was trying all his fancy flicks, getting put up in the air, and no getting the foul for it. He says, but what he then started to realise, he had to let the ball go quicker, pass and move, and according to Dan Fletcher, that's when he became you started to see the signs it would become. But coming back to his Rangers days, Stuart. Now we all know he done 9 in a row and all the rest of it. He was there for the last. Well, he was there for every one of the 9. Manager for the last 7. So the sort of main man in that front. But I wanted to look at the sort of Laudrup and Gascoigne years, in particular Gascoigne, because again this goes back to the sort of the man rather than the manager. Now we all know like Gascoigne's, he's had issues. I mean, even at Rangers, there were obviously issues. I think he's quite a lonely guy, and the stories of Walter Smith realising that Paul Gascoigne was spending Christmas alone and just like not having that, right? You're coming round to mine, and all that kind of thing. And that is the sign of a man, and the sign of a man manager, someone who realises that, at the end of the day, this is a member of his staff. He's thinking, this guy, I need him to be at the top of his game, and he's going to be spending Christmas alone. I'm not having that. He's coming round to mine, spending time with my family. I think again that shows a wee sign of who he was as a person, and how compassionate he really was. People talk about this sort of hard exterior, but there was definitely a soft centre there, I think.
There was. He sometimes didn't appreciate it if you pointed that out, but it was no, but he did that with players who were in trouble as well, not just Gascoigne, but players who were maybe had issues in their domestic lives, maybe players who had been off form and maybe took a bit of coaxing to get back to where he thought they should have been. He was a very, very compassionate person. He would take time out to, and I saw it as well when you'd journalists who, for various reasons, might not, be at their best, and Walter would ask the question of these folk, and asked, would ask people how are they getting on, because he was just a genuinely nice guy, and I think we saw that as well. When I'd mentioned there about Alan Davidson's funeral, when Walter won the Manager of the Year award in 2008, it was a couple of days before the UEFA Cup final, and Walter, and what was a moment of triumph for him, took time out not to talk about what Rangers had achieved or what he'd achieved, but actually to talk about Tommy Burns.
Yeah.
And that, just speaking about that just now, I'm quite moved by that, because again, it's almost like when he could have been celebrating, he was actually thinking of others. And for me, that is a measure of a person, much more than maybe what they're like when they're drinking champagne out a trophy or whatever it is. That is a real measure when somebody can, when you're hitting the heights, but you remember those less fortunate. I think that's a real measure of the man.
Yeah. Moving on to, he obviously won the 9, didn't quite manage the 10, final season empty-handed, and kind of left the club. And there was a kind of feeling it come to a natural conclusion at that point, I felt. But returns in 2007, and I have to be honest, I was a wee bit sceptical when they were bringing them back. Because there's this narrative that it never works the second time around. You should never go back and all that kind of thing. And there's always a fear that, that this, where he was already up there as one of the best Rangers managers. I think if he comes back and it doesn't work, he maybe tarnishes that reputation a wee bit. But as I was saying earlier on, I'm kind of the opinion that even though he was only here for 4 years the second time, he wasn't here as long. I would argue that his second period was his best period at Rangers, because obviously he didn't have the resources that he had previously in terms of finance to go out and buy the best players. And that Rangers team that he built, there's this whole notion that a team displays the manager's character, right? And I think that team did show what Walter Smith was all about. Ian Duff put a good thing on Twitter the day, that game when Rangers beat 9 men. When Rangers had 9 men and they beat St Mirren to win the Betfred Cup. he was like, it's not the most important victory, but if any game shows what Walter Smith's team was about, this was it. They were always together. They fought for everything. When you consider what that team done, 3 consecutive titles, reached the UEFA Cup final. I think it was 2 Scottish Cups, 2 League Cups. Just an incredible run of success for a team that was, and for a club that was in a bit of financial turmoil.
And a team that couldn't be freshened up because there was no money to freshen them up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was guys, it was quite literally, if you can still run and you can still play, you're getting picked. And, that you're right in some respects, you're absolutely spot on. That was almost like he could not go round the houses and say, I'll have him or put a bid in for him. There was nothing to bid with,
No.
and you look at who Rangers brought in at that time, and some guys were brought in and didn't last very long. Other guys that came in at that time were real winners, and they might never reach the status of Rangers greats or legends, but by God, they were good at that time. And Walter Smith was especially good at that time as well. The whole thing with Davy Weir, aged 74, still playing at centre back and still getting a tune out of him, and that being your leader on the pitch. That told you so much about that Rangers team as well. And again, we saw that, I think, on occasions right through that. I mean, you mentioned this at Mirren game there. If you can remember, who was sent off in that game, Rangers basically had to rebuild for the back out again. And again, it was like, if we're going to win this game, we're still having to play with, we're still going to have to score goals. And the speed that Rangers broke at to score, for Kenny Miller to score the winner, if there's anybody out there looking to learn how to counter-attack at pace with limited resources, that is a classic bit of footage to show them. It was a I mean, talk about smash and grab. It was quite incredible. And again, that just added to the reputation and the legend of Walter Smith, that here he could win cups with just 9 men. Didn't even need a full team. And these kind of things go down in folklore, and down in the history books. But to actually witness it and actually see it, you suddenly realise, fair play, that you still had you weren't going to lose that game, but then you had the tactical nous to be able to go and win it. And it was and another game, it was like you just felt like giving 2 fingers to the Fiorentina coach. Rangers won the tie playing non-football. So what? What I mean? You can say that you can say that Rangers didn't play any football and they were negative. What was the end result? Look at the history books. You lost in penalties. Nacho Novo scored the winner. You lost. You now look as a sore loser, because ultimately Walter Smith and Rangers did a job on you. And just go back a few years before that, Scotland beat France. Everybody remembers McFadden's goal in Paris. What they don't remember is that Walter Smith's team beat the French at Hampden as well a couple of years before that. If you look at that Scotland team, I think Scotland had 5 centre halves playing for them that day. But that was just how it was going to be. Didn't have the players to play certain positions. We're going to stymie and stop the French from playing their game. And when you do that, you only need 1 goal to win a game. And it worked perfectly well. Again, some people will say I was lucky. Personally, I think that just shows you how much nous he had when it came to tactics and came to and reading and working out how to win a game, how not to lose a game first, how not to concede goals when you only actually need 1 goal yourself to then win it. And I think that's was testament to actually how good the guy actually was.
He'd done it before as well with the 2 Celtic games when we were down to 10. That League Cup semi-final when David Robertson got sent off. Then there was another League Cup, I think it was the semi-final at Ibrox, when Peter Housler got sent off. You're right, he did know how to win games, and adverse circumstances. You know what I mean? When his back was against the wall, and I mean it's just a really sad day. And
I still think there's it won't be. It's not recorded. Well, it is recorded somewhere, I suppose. But I thought Walter Smith, his cuteness and his, how he saw things differently from other people was captured in one moment when Hampden was being redeveloped, and the semi-final tie against Celtic was either going to get played at Celtic Park or at Ibrox, and they tossed the coin, and Joe Jordan said heads, and it was heads, and Walter Smith, no, that was just to see who shouted first. And Joe Jordan fell for it, and so did the guy tossing the coin. He fell for it as well. So you can shout this time, Joe. So they threw it up, they're like that. Joe Jordan lost. The tie was at Ibrox, and Rangers won the semi-final tie at Ibrox. And I just thought that was an absolute masterclass in bluff. You know what I mean? That was, you could have been working for one of the intelligence agencies. They think that quick and basically just be so sharp that you come up with that. No. I was just to decide who called, and everybody fell for it. And it was like, how, years later, how did you keep a straight face? He said, actually, he said, I knew I was going to do it. He said, but maybe I actually believed it myself that I would get away with it, and I did.
Yeah. Right, Stuart, conscious of time. I mean, final thoughts and how you remember him. I mean, for me, he's been a huge part of my Rangers life. I mean, he joined the club when I was 86. I would be 13. He left the second time in 2011. I would have been in sort of late 30s at the time. So he's a huge part of my Rangers supporting life. Brought me so many happy memories. He's given my liver an absolute kicking, by the way. The amount of hangovers that I can attribute to Walter Smith. And so, that's how I'll remember him, just being someone who provided me with so many happy memories and made it a pleasure to be a Rangers supporter. How will you remember him?
Oh, I remember him as a guy who was the Rangers manager, but a really nice person with it. I think he proved that, good guys can win, and win with a bit of class and win with a bit of style. And, also today, when I get a wee bit kind of, not emotional, but I certainly was moved. I ended up having a laugh and a smile, because there were so many things that he could laugh at, and so many things that made you smile. Just different things. I remember being end of season. In fact, it was a Christmas dinner for the press, and there was those and such as those get invited. And it was the end of 1994, and Rangers had lost the cup final, but it's denied them a double treble.
I was there that day.
Imagine that. Yeah,
I know. I knew we would regret it. But there we go.
So who did you blame for the goal that Rangers lost?
It was a mix-up between Maxwell and McPherson, wasn't it?
It was.
I would, if I was being honest, I would probably go towards Maxwell.
Well, there was a maybe an alcohol-fueled discussion late on in the day about who was to blame for that, and Dave McPherson was taking pelters from one or two guys, and on my kids' lives, we're sitting at the table, and Walter turned to me, having only ever seen me play once-in goals for Rangers against the Choco hotel staff, and turned to me and said, "Stuart, you're a goalkeeper. Who would you blame?" And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's a leading question, Walter. Now, am I going to agree with one or two of these guys around here who I'm never going to have to ask for an interview, or am I going to basically side with the Rangers manager, who I need to speak to you on a daily basis nearly.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, Ali Maxwell had the whole of Hampden to aim for. And Walter went, see, there's a goalkeeper telling you that. And honest to God, my stock went up so high. It was just a brilliant moment. But that, again, those that didn't really see Walter up close might not have appreciated that. But that's more the kind of guy he was in person and in private and amongst those he knew, rather than what his public exterior was. And there's a bit of me today, a sad day. I just wish sometimes Walter you would have seen a wee bit more of that side of Walter. There's a clip kicking about with Tam Cowan interviewing Walter outside a ground, and who do you fancy in the World Cup? And
The Brazilians.
And Tam saying, do you like a Brazilian? And Walter burst out laughing. And there's a lot of people out there. That is a Walter that they knew, because he may have been caught a wee bit off guard, but he saw the funny side of it, and he could share a laugh and he could share a joke. And I just maybe wish we'd seen a wee bit more of that. It's difficult though, because we all know bank managers and dentists that are really, really funny guys, but when they're doing their job, they're kind of serious. I think sometimes Walter was like that as well. But if I'm going to remember him, I'll remember him as a fantastic man, a really great family man, and conclude by saying to Ethel and Stevie and Neil and the rest of the extended family that my thoughts are genuinely with them tonight.
Yeah, and I think that comes from everyone at the pod as well. I would say our thoughts are with immediate family and friends of the now sadly departed Walter Smith. Thanks for joining us tonight. Obviously a very different show tonight. Big thanks to Stewart for his contribution. We'll try and get a preview show out on Friday, but there's bigger and more important things going on at the moment.